The black stallion didn't lift his head when they opened the gate. He didn't move when the auctioneer yelled his name like it was something to be ashamed of. He didn't even flinch when a child pointed and laughed. Midnight had already learned the cruelest lesson any creature could when the world sees your pain. It walks away. But what he didn't know, what no one in that room knew, was that his story was only just beginning. And it would start with a girl who saw not what he was, but what he could become. Before we begin this unforgettable story, would you mind sharing where you're from in the comments and if stories of love, loyalty, and second chances move you? Please give this video a like and consider subscribing. Elk Ridge, North Carolina. Late October. The wind moved like a tired sigh through the trees surrounding the Elk Ridge auction yard, shaking the last of the copper-red leaves from their branches. It was a cold, brittle kind of autumn, one where the skies stayed pale and the morning smelled of old frost. The mountains loomed in the distance, watchful and silent, as if withholding judgment. Inside the weathered auction barn, the air buzzed with idle conversation and the occasional clink of boot against concrete. Hay dust hung in the beams of afternoon light like 1,000 unsettled spirits. Farmers and ranchers filled the wooden bleachers in coats the color of mud and denim. Most of them older, their faces wrinkled by sun and stubbornness. At the far end, a makeshift stage had been cleared for livestock to be brought in and displayed, sold to the highest bidder, or sent back to wherever forgotten animals go. Today, the final lot was met not with excitement, but with a hush, the kind bred from discomfort rather than awe. A horse was led into the center ring. No fanfare, no coaxing, just the dull thud of hooves on packed dirt. He didn't walk proudly like others had before him. He limped. His coat, black as a coal seam, was dulled by grime and marked by healed-over wounds. Thin, ribs slightly visible through his hide, mane tangled like thread caught in barbed wire. One eye seemed clouded with old injury, but the other, sharp, haunted, swept across the crowd, unflinching. He did not flinch because he expected nothing. The auctioneer, a ruddy-faced man with thinning blonde hair named Dale Hopkins, gave a half-hearted smile and slapped the microphone like it owed him money. Dale had worked these auctions for over 20 years, and while he'd sold everything from prized bulls to three-legged goats, even he could feel the weight of silence settle like dust on the barn. "Well now, we've got us a real mystery here," Dale said, forcing cheer into his voice. "Gentlemen, ladies, what'll you give me for this fine, black stallion? Starting at 100. Do I hear 100? A snort from the back row, a woman in a leopard print scarf whispered. "It looks like it gave up a long time ago." The crowd chuckled, murmurs rippling like wind through dry leaves. Dale cleared his throat, shifted tactics. All right, 75. He's got legs, sort of. He breathes. That's worth something. 50. No one moved. The horse stood still, his head lowered, as if the ridicule barely registered anymore. He had heard worse in the silence of empty barns. Then, from the back of the crowd, a chair scraped loud against concrete. The sound cracked through the mockery like a whip. A young woman stood. She was not from the auction crowd, not in the usual sense. Her clothes were plain. A worn flannel shirt rolled at the sleeves, grease-stained jeans, steel-toed boots scuffed from hours of work. Her brown hair was tied back beneath a navy ball cap that read Turner's Auto. Her name was Abby Turner. 22 years old, and she worked 6 days a week fixing transmissions and exhausts at the only garage in town. Abby was average in height but lean, with sharp cheekbones and quiet gray eyes that had seen more loss than most women her age, since her mother's passing the year before, breast cancer, swift and merciless. Abby had walked through life with an invisible coat of armor. She was tough. Yes, but not cold, just careful. Her grief had taught her that silence could be both shelter and prison. Now, she raised her hand, her voice steady though not loud. $50. She said. The room turned. Laughter erupted. Someone muttered, $50. For that, Dale blinked, surprised. Well, all right then, sold, I suppose. $50 to the lady in the back. Bless your heart. She moved down the steps without fanfare, stepping into the ring. Her boots kicked up the dust. The stallion raised his head slightly. Abby didn't reach out. Not yet. She crouched down near him, a few feet away, her voice soft and low. I don't know who broke you, she said, but you're not done. The horse didn't respond, but he didn't back away either. That, in itself, was a beginning. By the time she let him out of the ring, the horse limping beside her. Most of the crowd had already turned back to their bidding sheets, their jokes, their cups of black coffee. No one paid attention as Abby loaded the stallion, who still had no name, into a borrowed trailer hitched to her rusted pickup, except for one pair of eyes watching through a cracked barn window. Logan Miller, 12 years old, stood with his chin resting against the ledge, a chocolate bar clutched tightly in his hand. He was small for his age, his frame thin and fragile, but his eyes, large and ocean-colored, held something ancient and shy. Logan had been diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder when he was 4. Since his father left and his mother started working double shifts at the diner, Logan rarely spoke to anyone, retreating instead into the sanctuary of drawings, animal books, and long walks by the creek behind his grandmother's house. He had come with his uncle, who didn't notice when Logan wandered away. But when the girl with grease on her jeans bought the forgotten horse, Logan had felt something shift inside him. A pulse, a word that hadn't reached his lips in months. Later that evening, as Abby gently led the black horse, now named Midnight, into the small wooden stable behind her mother's old home, Logan stood at the edge of her property line, behind the honeysuckle bushes, silent, watching. And when Midnight lifted his head and stared back at him, Logan whispered one word, barely audible beneath his breath. Midnight. The old stable groaned in the early light, its boards warped by years of neglect. But still standing, it sat behind Abby Turner's childhood home, nestled at the edge of Elk Ridge's wooded backroads, where fog clung to the earth each morning like memory. This had once been her father's place, a lean-to for the 2 workhorses he'd loved more than most men, after his death. The stable fell quiet. Now, it stirred again because of a horse who didn't want to be seen, and a woman who refused to look away. Midnight stood in the far corner of his stall, ribs faintly showing beneath a coat of dull black. His eyes flicked toward every creak of wood, every rustle of wind. Abby didn't blame him. He didn't trust the world. She understood that. She didn't try to lead him. She didn't even bring a bridle each morning before work. She came with a thermos of tea and a book from her mother's old collection. Poetry, mostly soft things. She would sit cross-legged on an overturned bucket just outside the stall and read aloud. Other times, she'd hum without words, tunes remembered from long car rides, from her mother's singing in the kitchen. Nothing loud, nothing sudden. Midnight never came closer, but he no longer turned away. In the evenings, she returned with the same routine. By the 3rd day, he no longer stood in the farthest shadow. By the 5th, he had begun to eat while she was present, It was progress measured in inches, not miles. She noticed the boy again on the 6th day. He stood just beyond the fence, at the edge of the honeysuckle bush. Abby had seen him before. Logan, the Miller boy who lived 2 doors down with his grandmother. Always quiet, always alone. He looked about 12, thin and pale, his dark blonde hair hanging into his eyes. He wore the same zip-up hoodie each day, even when it was warm. Sleeves pulled over his hands like a shield. He said nothing, just stood there, watching the stable, watching midnight. His lips moved sometimes, barely perceptible, as if he were whispering something to the horse that no one else could hear. Abby didn't call to him. She didn't wave, but she left the gate unlatched each day after that. Logan returned, always after school, always alone, always at the same spot. Midnight noticed him too. The horse would lift his head, ears forward, eyes strangely focused. It wasn't the look of wariness. It was something else, by the 2nd week. Abby began to speak while Logan stood at the edge of the yard. She spoke to him the same way she spoke to Midnight, calm, open, without expectation. "Midnight likes when I read the sad poems," she said one evening, glancing toward the fence. Logan didn't respond, but he didn't leave. A few days later, she heard something new. "She's not sad, she's remembering." The voice was barely audible. Abby looked up, startled. Logan was staring at the horse. "What's that?" she asked gently. He blinked, lowered his gaze, as if he hadn't meant to speak. Abby stood, brushed hay from her jeans. "You mean the poems or midnight?" He was quiet again, then the horse. Abby crossed her arms and leaned against the stall door. "You talk to him?" Logan nodded. "Does he talk back?" He hesitated, then shook his head. "Not like that, just feelings." Abby tilted her head. "What's he feeling now?" Logan's eyes flicked toward the stall. "He wants to move, but he's scared you'll try to touch him that night." Abby didn't reach for Midnight. She just sat, and sure enough, the horse stepped forward. Tentative but unafraid, she didn't speak. She just let him come as close as he wanted. By the end of the week, he had touched his nose to her knee. It was Logan who helped her understand more. The boy never said much. But when he did, it was precise, honest, not guesswork. Something deeper. He doesn't like hands above his head. He told her once. Because of hitting Abby asked. Logan didn't answer. He didn't have to. He began showing up earlier, sometimes even before she got home. Abby found him crouched beside the fence, drawing with a stick in the dirt. She started leaving a second cup of tea on the porch rail. Logan never took it in front of her, but by the time she returned, it was always empty. As the days turned colder, Abby found herself looking forward to Logan's company. He rarely spoke more than a sentence or two, but there was something in his presence that made the quiet feel fuller. Logan didn't fill silences. He understood them. Abby liked that. One afternoon, she brought out a short stool and placed it by the stable door. Logan sat. She handed him a small grooming brush, not saying a word. He didn't use it, but he held it, resting it on his lap. Fingers curled around it like it was something sacred. "Sometimes," Abby said softly, "trust doesn't come back, but sometimes it does. You just have to let it choose its own way home." Logan's fingers twitched against the brush. "I think he's choosing," he whispered. And maybe so was Logan. The frost clung longer in the mornings now, turning the pasture behind Abby's house into a glistening field of white. The wind had grown sharper, the days shorter, and yet Midnight, once hollow-eyed and silent, now stood straighter. His coat, once dull and lifeless, had begun to gleam faintly in the pale sunlight. There was still fear in his eyes, but it no longer ruled him. Abby leaned on the fence, sipping coffee from a cracked mug, watching as Midnight took slow, thoughtful steps along the fence line. Logan stood a few feet away, bundled in 2 layers of sweatshirts, drawing shapes in the frost with his fingers. Neither of them said anything. They didn't need to, but for Abby, peace wasn't enough. Not yet. Midnight's wounds were healing. Yes, but some scars ran deeper than what touch and patience could reach. There were still moments when he flinched from shadows, or stood frozen when someone coughed too loudly. Abby couldn't keep guessing. She needed to know where he'd come from. So, the next afternoon, with Logan busy drawing in the barn, Abby drove across town to the county records office attached to the Elkridge Livestock Auction House. The building was squat, beige, and forgettable, like a place designed to process forms, not history. Inside, the air smelled like old paper and faint mildew. Behind the desk sat Edna Rowe, a thin woman in her late 60s with large glasses and thinning gray hair tied into a stiff bun. She wore a floral cardigan that looked like it belonged in the 1970s, and her expression hovered somewhere between boredom and faint disdain. Edna had worked there for decades, and her mood rarely shifted unless someone brought her cinnamon muffins from the diner 2 blocks over. "I'm looking for records," Abby said, keeping her voice polite. "A horse sold here a few weeks back. Black stallion. Scarred, didn't get any paperwork with him." Edna narrowed her eyes. "Name of the buyer. Abby Turner. That's me." The woman sighed, heaved herself up, and disappeared into the back room. Abby waited, heart thudding. After 10 minutes and the distinct sound of drawers being wrestled open, Edna returned with a thin, dusty folder labeled with a code. Horse ID 462B, listed as Midnight by the auction. But owner didn't register a name, came from a private training stable outside Greenville, owner of record, Frank Delaney. Abby froze. The name was familiar. Too familiar. Frank Delaney had been something of a legend in North Carolina's horse circles 10 years ago. He trained competitive show jumpers, strong, lean horses made for speed and grace, but his reputation had soured after allegations of overwork and neglect surfaced. Nothing had been proven, nothing official. At least, Edna raised an eyebrow. "You know him." Abby nodded slowly. "I've heard of him." She took the file, thanked Edna, and left. That evening, Abby sat on the porch steps, the folder unopened in her lap. The last light of day filtered through the trees like gold dust. Midnight stood at the far end of the pasture, nose pressed to the wind. Logan sat cross-legged in the grass, sketchpad balanced on his knees, pencil flicking silently over paper. "Do you want to see what I'm working on?" Logan asked suddenly. Without looking up, Abby blinked. He rarely initiated conversation. "Sure," she said, rising. She walked over and crouched beside him. The drawing was detailed. Almost surprisingly so, Midnight, mid-leap over a wooden fence, his mane flying like black silk, legs stretched in perfect motion. The proportions were sharp, the intensity in the eyes striking. "Wow," Abby breathed. "That's amazing." "Logan." He shrugged, but a small smile pulled at the corner of his mouth. "I want to enter it in the fall art show," he said. "The one at the library. Ms. Heather told us about it." Ms. Heather was Logan's art teacher, a kind woman in her 40s with a voice as smooth as honey and eyes that never judged too quickly. She had noticed Logan's quiet talent early on but never pushed him. just gave him the space to draw his world in pencil and paper. Abby nodded. I think you should. It's beautiful. I want people to see him like I see him, Logan said softly. Not just broken. Abby felt something tighten in her throat. Later that night, she opened the folder. Inside was a transfer record, vet forms, and a short paragraph scrawled in blocky handwriting. The summary was cold, clinical, black male, approx 7 years, used for competitive show jumping, pulled from training due to tendon damage, not fit for further use, relinquished by owner. Beneath that, in the signature box, was Frank Delaney's name. She sat back in the chair, the folder slipping to her lap, her jaw clenched. 7 years old, still young for a horse. Tendon damage explained the limp. What didn't make sense was the rest, the fear, the flinching, the distrust. Physical injury didn't account for that. Emotional trauma did. The next morning, she called the number listed for Delaney. It rang 5 times before a voice, raspy and impatient. Answered. Yeah, is this Frank Delaney who's asking? My name's Abby Turner. I adopted a horse that came from your training stable, black stallion, scarred. Listed as unusable. Silence. Then. So what I just want to understand what happened to him. You got a broken one. Should have put him down like the others. Abby's grip tightened on the phone. He's not broken. He's healing. A chuckle. Bitter. They all look better once they're fed. She ended the call without another word. Later that evening, she didn't tell Logan what Delaney said. She didn't want to poison the air around them instead. She helped him prepare the drawing for submission, mounted it on clean black board, wrapped it carefully in plastic. When Logan handed her the title card, she smiled through the sting in her eyes. The horse that still believes. The first frost of November cracked beneath Abby's boots as she led Midnight toward the open field beyond the stable. The sky was pale and dry, the sun still low and shy above the pine-covered hills. It had taken weeks of slow, deliberate work to get to this point. Weeks of brushing, feeding, sitting, and waiting. But today would be different. Today, they were leaving the safe shadows of the stall. Midnight's hooves sank slightly into the cold grass. He paused just past the stable gate, nostrils flaring as he surveyed the unfamiliar space. The wide, open field was a patchwork of yellowed grass and leftover summer clover. Framed by split-rail fencing Abby's father had built by hand. It was not a racetrack, but it would serve its purpose. Logan stood a few feet back, bundled in a thick navy coat 2 sizes too big, a beanie nearly covering his eyes. His sketch pad, as always, was under his arm. He didn't speak, but his quiet presence made the air feel steadier. Abby clicked her tongue gently, giving Midnight a soft nudge with the lead rope. He took one hesitant step forward, then another, then stopped, ears swiveling at the sound of wind in the trees. You're okay, she murmured. It's just grass and wind, just us. Midnight stood still for almost 2 minutes, body tense as a drawn bow. Then, suddenly, he let out a breath and shook his head, mane rippling behind them. Logan whispered something under his breath. Abby didn't catch the words, but Midnight's ears twitched in response. They began with walking, small circles, straight lines. Abby didn't ask for anything more. Each day, they returned to the field. Each day. Midnight hesitated a little less. On the 4th morning, he bolted. It was a sound, distant but sharp. The crack of a truck bed slamming shut from somewhere down the road. Midnight reared, eyes wide with panic, muscles coiling into flight. The rope slipped from Abby's fingers as he galloped across the field, his legs kicking up frozen clumps of earth. Midnight, she called, her breath catching. But it was Logan who stepped forward, slow and deliberate. He didn't run, he didn't shout, he just raised a hand and whispered again. Midnight slowed, still wild-eyed, but his ears flicked toward the sound. When he stopped near the fence line, Logan stood in front of him, unmoving. Abby reached them a moment later, chest heaving, heart pounding. Logan looked up at her. He thought it was happening again. Abby placed a hand on Midnight's shoulder. "Yeah, but he stopped. He heard me," Logan said, with a small stunned smile, a week later. Claire arrived. Claire Duval was in her mid-30s, tall and broad-shouldered, with copper-red hair tied in a braid that swung as she walked. She wore worn jeans, work boots, and a canvas vet's jacket with a faded patch reading North County Animal Health. Her face bore the calm of someone used to emergencies, but her smile, when it came, was soft and genuine. She stepped out of her dusty white Jeep with a vet bag in one hand and a clipboard in the other. "Heard you've got a miracle horse back here," she said. Abby shook her hand. More like a miracle in progress. Claire knelt to examine Midnight's legs while Abby and Logan watched. Her hands were practiced, gentle. She didn't flinch when the stallion tensed, just whispered calmly and waited. "Old tendon injury," Claire said, "left rear leg, mostly healed now. But he's compensating with his gait, needs strengthening, muscle balance. You've done good work just getting him out here. I've got no training." Abby admitted, "Just patience." Claire smiled. "That's more than most horses ever get." She offered to help with a formal recovery plan. Light lunging, interval walking, slow reintegration of stamina exercises. Twice a week, she'd come by and coach Abby and Midnight through the routine. Abby agreed, and from that point on, the empty field became their classroom. Logan started coming earlier each day, sometimes staying long after dark. He didn't ride, but he walked beside Midnight during warm-ups, speaking softly. Sometimes he sang under his breath, barely above a whisper. Other times, he drew in the dirt with a stick. Midnight never flinched around him. By the third week, Midnight was trotting. By the fourth, he was cantering in long, steady arcs under Abby's gentle command. His hooves made a low rhythm in the frozen grass. His breath steamed in the cold, but his eyes gleamed brighter than ever before. It was then that Logan's voice began to change too. Miss Heather, his art teacher, had invited students to submit both artwork and writing for the Elkridge Autumn Showcase, a small community event held each year at the town library. Abby encouraged Logan to enter his drawing of Midnight, already matted and titled. But it was Claire who encouraged him to write something. "You've got a voice." "Logan," she said one afternoon while brushing Midnight's back legs, "you don't have to shout with it, just speak." So he did, one evening in the warm light of Abby's kitchen. Logan pulled out a folded sheet of paper and began reading aloud. His voice was tremulous at first, like a leaf in wind, but it grew stronger with every word. It was a poem, about fear, about how it looks like teeth and thunder, but also how it can be patient, how it can change when someone believes you can be brave. When he finished, Abby and Claire sat in stunned silence. "That's beautiful," Abby said, her eyes glassy. Logan looked down at his lap, cheeks red. "I want to read it at the showcase." Abby smiled. "You'll do great." On the night of the showcase, the Elkridge Library overflowed with townsfolk wrapped in scarves and corduroy, holding hot cider in paper cups. Drawings lined the walls, pumpkins, barns, winter trees. But Logan's stood apart, Midnight, mid-leap, framed in a burst of imagined sunlight beneath it. His name, Logan Miller, age 12, when it came time for readings. Logan stepped up to the small microphone at the front of the room. Abby stood near the back, hand gripping the edge of her coat. Midnight wasn't there physically, but his spirit filled the room. Logan cleared his throat, and then he read. His poem was short, honest, raw, and when he said the last line, he ran not because he was afraid, but because he remembered what it felt like to fall. The room was utterly still. Then came the applause, not wild, but warm, long, earnest. Abby watched him step down from the podium, shoulders a little straighter than before. She wiped her eyes and whispered under her breath, "You're flying too." The morning of the exhibition arrived beneath a sky brushed in soft pinks and bruised blues. A low mist curled above the rolling pastures of Havenbrook Arena, the county's largest riding ground, nestled just outside Elkridge. It had once hosted state qualifiers and county rodeos, but today it welcomed something quieter, something that wasn't about ribbons or rankings, but redemption. Banners flapped gently in the breeze. Ride for Hope, a showcase for special needs youth. Families filled the stands, bundled in scarves and wool coats, their breath rising in clouds. Children wandered the edges of the arena, some in wheelchairs, others with headphones or therapy dogs. The crowd was warm, not loud, but even the low murmur was a world apart from the silence of Abby's field. Abby stood in the prep lane, adjusting Midnight's halter. He was tense, every muscle taut beneath his black coat. His eyes flicked to the stands, the announcer's mic, the flags. She felt his fear vibrating through the lead rope. "You're not alone," she whispered, resting her forehead gently against his. "Not this time." Logan stood beside her, wearing a white button-up shirt under his navy coat, his sketch pad tucked into a canvas satchel. His hands trembled, but his voice, when it came, was sure. He's ready, he's scared, but he's ready. Claire approached from the vet tent, clipboard under one arm, her signature braid now tied with a green ribbon in support of the event. "Vitals are good," she said. "Muscles are limber. He's been prepared for this." Abby nodded. "Doesn't mean I am." Claire smiled. "You don't have to be, just walk with him." At the entrance gate, the announcer, a silver-haired man with a kind southern drawl named Bill Granger, called out their names. Abby Turner and Midnight, exhibition class, non-competitive ride. A polite round of applause rose as the gate opened. Midnight stepped forward and froze. The wind picked up, tossing paper programs across the bleachers. A child's balloon popped in the far corner. Midnight's ears pinned back, hooves jittering in place. Abby didn't pull him. She didn't speak. She turned to Logan. The boy walked calmly ahead, not looking back, and knelt near the first jump, a simple white fence no taller than Logan's chest. He didn't say a word, but his presence alone drew Midnight's attention. Slowly, the stallion moved, one step, then another. Abby led him in a wide circle, giving him space to see, to breathe. Midnight sniffed the air, let out a long, rattling exhale, and lifted his head. They approached the jump. He hesitated, ears flicking. Abby stepped back, letting the reins go slack. And then, with a breath that felt like it cracked something open, Midnight ran. It wasn't fast, not wild. It was measured, graceful, like a dancer remembering the rhythm of a song. He soared over the jump with the room to spare, his mane catching the sunlight in a curtain of black silk. The crowd gasped, then rose in applause, not wild, but reverent. Logan smiled. Abby swallowed a sob. They completed the short course, a figure eight of 3, low jumps and one wide pass along the arena's rail. Midnight moved with a quiet confidence, his stride long and smooth when they finished. Abby turned him toward the crowd and gave a small nod. No medals were awarded, but the moment itself glittered brighter than any ribbon. Back near the stables, a man stepped forward from the shade of the observation tent. He was in his early 60s, still trim from years of hard labor. His once dark hair was now a dusting of silver, and he wore a brown leather jacket zipped up to the chin. His face was lined not just with age, but with something deeper: regret. His name was Frank Delaney. Abby tensed as he approached. "I saw the ride," he said quietly. Didn't think he had it in him. She didn't reply. Frank looked at the ground. Scuffed his boot against the dirt. "I came to say I was wrong. And to see if, I don't know, maybe I could help somehow." Abby stepped between him and Midnight, her voice firm but calm. "You don't get to help now. You had your chance." Frank looked up, stung. Abby's voice softened just a little. "Midnight doesn't need saving anymore. He saved himself." There was silence. Then Frank nodded slowly and walked away. His shoulders bowed, but his pace steady. Later that afternoon, Logan's drawing was displayed on the arena wall, beside a selection of other student artwork. A panel of local artists had chosen winners for each age group. When Logan's name was called as the first place winner for ages 12-14, he didn't react at first. Then he looked at Abby, who gave him a nod. He stepped forward, picked up his certificate, and stood with quiet dignity beside his sketch. Midnight, soaring. The judges asked him what he'd like to say. He hesitated, then spoke. "This horse. He showed me that being afraid doesn't mean you're weak. It just means you remember. And you try anyway." The crowd applauded again. Not because he was a child, not because he won, but because he had spoken the truth that evening, as the sky blushed with the last light of day. Abby received an invitation in her email inbox from the Elk Ridge Community Forum. They wanted her to speak at next month's gathering about resilience, about healing, about horses. She read the message aloud to Logan while they brushed Midnight beneath the barn lights. He nodded once, then handed her the brush. "Tell them about how he flies," he said. A week later, the local paper ran a story titled "The Horse That Refused to Break." It was shared on social media, picked up by a regional news station. Emails poured in: parents of children with disabilities, veterans with trauma, riders with retired horses. They all said the same thing. Thank you. Midnight, the unwanted stallion, had become something more than a symbol. He was a reminder, to a tired town, to forgotten people, that even what's broken can rise again. And on that final quiet night of fall, as Logan curled up in a hay bale with his sketch pad, and Abby leaned against the stable door sipping cider, Midnight stood at the center of his pasture, silhouetted by moonlight, not waiting anymore, watching. Alive, sometimes. The world turns its back on what it sees as broken. A horse too scarred to race, a child too quiet to be heard, a heart too hurt to trust again. But what this story reminds us is that healing often starts with just one quiet yes, a step into the field, a hand held out in patience, a whisper of belief. Midnight was never truly broken. He had only been waiting for someone to see him through the eyes of grace, and sometimes that grace doesn't come with noise or grandeur, but with the steady hand of a girl who never gave up, and the voice of a boy who learned to speak through love. If you believe in second chances, if you believe that miracles still happen, if you believe that God can use the forgotten to inspire the world, then this story was for you. Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that even in silence, God is still working. Comment Amen below if this story touched your heart. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and join our community of believers who know that hope, like faith, can move even the most stubborn of fears. May God bless you and everyone who still dares to believe in quiet miracles.